Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to say that this year we have a forgiving year, forgiving summer or spring. Since many of you are here, I'm sure it's quite pleasant in terms of the weather. But change is life, change is nature, so therefore one could expect rapidly to change in the next few days. Not to be a weather forecast, but so first of all, we will recite the taking a refuge, generating of the four immeasurables, and then offering of body, speech, and mind to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then followed by asking the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to turn the wheel of Dharma. And lastly, then for our sake, meaning both the who listens the teachings, and also for the sake of the one who explains the teachings, for both the sake, then we will recite the supplication or the prayer, aspiration prayer to the Buddha Manjushri, or the wisdom aspect of wisdom. Okay, yeah. Number two, jiki onzina, yoga. Kali kalichin. Sanjin chedan zojin chonam lan janju bardo danen jazun dagi jinzon jibe sanam jin rolan penchir sanjin rubarasho sanjin chedan zojin chonam Chanju bardo dane jazun dage jinzon jibe sanam rolam penje sanje robraisho sanje chodan zoje chonam Chanju bardo dane jazun dage jinzon jibe sanam Rola benje sanje robrasho semjen damjen dewa dan deve jordan dembre jorje donga jen jordan dobre jorje donga mebe dewa damba mendo jorje nyere jordan nyadan do Tamyam Chembola Nembra Joy Ji Semje Damje Deva Dan Devi Jordan Dembra Jorje Dongal Da Dongal Gi Jordan Dovra Dongal Mebe Deva Damba Dam Medova Jorje Nere Jada Nyedan Tamyam Jembola Nembra Joji Semje Namje Deva Dan Devi Jordan Dembra Dongal Dan Dongal Ji Jordan Dovre Joji Dongal Mebe Deva Damba Medova Joji Nere Jadan Yadan Tamyam Chembola Nebra Joji Si Puji Jungshi Mendo Dan Rira Lingshi Yende Jembande Sanje Shendo Mende Pova Yen Dogan Namda Shenla Jembra Sho semje namje samba dang lo yin chen dan jin da chen jun tong mon de ba yin chu je ko lo ko do so Lama dang gombo jambe yang lan chang za lo gang ge lo de de nian ten da nie da nam da Jin nian dong gen ji jin zi zhi ni ge to bra le wang jin gang da zi be zhi ra ma re men zong dong ran ji zi de ro zo kon lang bu ji da Yan lan du ju yang den zong zhu trai che zhu nye mo nye long le jie jia zhu du zi ma ri men zi du ma la nye gu jie nye zhen zi ran zhe nong de ne sa jie sa ju ta yan den le zhu jia zi tu gu ju ra ju dang ju nye ji Dans le musée, jamais yang la de zedin jian 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 rao wu zin jian dans le témoin men ba ra sa ne ga dang jian 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 lun dong ba lo de bo ve na wan za do so According to the program, then starting from today for the next 3 days, for the next 4 days, basically we will be brushing basically through a very comprehensive, a very profound teaching or by a great ancient Indian Buddhist master, or he's also known as one of the 84 Mahasiddhas, since we are very fascinated by Mahasiddhas. But for more historians probably, it is the author of this teaching is what you call basically a prince in the what is known as nowadays Gujarat, where our current Prime Minister Modi comes from. So there are some historical facts where you can look up on Wikipedia and Google and whatnot. So I'm sure I don't have to take much of time. Basically, he was considered by many as a realized being, a realized Bodhisattva. Although he portrayed himself among others as an ordinary being, to an extent extremely ordinary, one could say. But nevertheless, when there was, as it is with many Bodhisattvas, when it came to benefiting sentient beings, and often it is also a case where realized Bodhisattvas know when they should appear, or when they should engage. So accordingly, whenever there were times that called for their presence to benefit sentient beings, they appeared. And particularly it was the case with the Bodhisattva Shantideva. That was later his name when he became basically a Bodhisattva. Earlier he lived very similar to that of the life story of Buddha, one could say, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, as a prince. And later, and then there were many signs that the worldly, the luxuries of the world, of the conditioned world, are not satisfactory, that they brought further confusion, and it's not the ultimate aim. And so as a result, then he left, because there were a lot of indications, directly and indirectly. So in short, he left the palace life and then sought for ascetic way of life. From time to time, well, probably one could say in the beginning he lived his life in the communes, one could say, within the communities of Sangha, and so on. So wherever he went, he benefited countless of sentient beings, and one of the ways he benefited was by not exactly to say accidental, but somehow one could say coincidental in a way. That when he lived in the great university of Nalanda, which we can see in the form of ruins near Bodh Gaya in the state of Bihar. That's in that university he resided for a number of years, and towards the end, then the community asked him to teach something beneficial. And so, seeing the ripe circumstance, one could say, then he taught this very teaching. And he taught this in a form, in a manner where it mainly focuses on the ethics, the way, the path, the tools that one would normally require if one wishes to become a Bodhisattva. So that's why the title is also known as The Way of the Bodhisattva. So that's why we're sort of brushing through. In the previous years, we went through the first two chapters. I'm sure some of you were there. Maybe for some of you it's new, but nevertheless, it's a subject that doesn't really require, let's say, a scientist's mind, an extremely brilliant mind to really understand the meaning. Meaning that it comes as simple as it comes or as it gets, and therefore it's something that we can all engage, no matter what kind of background we come from, no matter what kind of mentality, culture we are used to. That it's a teaching that we can all engage, understand, and apply. From time to time, one might think that certain things are outdated, obsolete, because we are living in a modern era, information era, enlightened era, and so on. But all of those methods are actually timeless. Timeless in a way that it's classic. Yes. And nowadays, we slowly find out about the value of something classic, to a point where we take pride in driving classical automobiles and so on. So, in the same way, these methods, although they may seem outdated, they are actually classic. Why? Because no matter how advanced a modern a society, let's say, becomes, the foundation of the society is more or less the same. It's the same foundation. So therefore, the same challenges are met no matter how modern we think we are. So therefore, the methods, the means are exactly focused on those root causes, root challenges, so therefore they are timeless. So now coming closer to the subject, so we are going through the third chapter. The third chapter in the program, it says adopting the Bodhisattvas, what was it, mind or something, or bodhicitta, and then some says, some translation states full acceptance of the awakening mind, and so on. So, or taking a hold of bodhicitta. So, basically what it means is that it's the stage where it discusses how do we motivate ourselves, how do we apply ourselves to train, to practice, to generate, to cultivate the, one could say, the Bodhisattva's attitude. Bodhicitta, the term itself, sometimes it can be understood as sort of as a name. Sometimes it can be understood as its quality, as its purpose, as its action. So, in this case, it would both applies basically. So, taking hold of the Bodhisattva name, one could say. If you engage in this path, then somehow we will be able to obtain its name. That we will be able to call ourselves, we will be able to label ourselves as Bodhisattvas, one could say. In terms of the action that this is a way, this is a chapter, or this is a method where we learn how to activate, one could say, this quality. So in both ways, both applies basically. So what I will do is I will try to read the verses from two different versions, and if you haven't, or if you have, it's good. If you haven't, you should also get some printouts for the coming days of different versions, because although English is a great a great language, it's a universal language, so great that it's universal. Nevertheless, the Tibetan has its own uniqueness, which is that although it has its own way of communicating, it expresses a unique way of describing one's emotions, and nevertheless, in terms of its structure, its grammar, all of those are borrowed from none other than Sanskrit, the ancient Indian, one of the ancient Indian languages. So therefore, the Tibetan language is able to summarize, condense, express almost the entire meaning of what is present in Sanskrit, let's say. Meaning, particularly, it is able to express the Buddha Dharma completely. Because it's not that it's designed for that, but somehow it's it's based on that, the language itself. The Tibetan language would not do a good job in how to say. This is my personal opinion, of course. That it's not a language for scientific research. It's not a language for probably it has qualities to it has its own place in the medical science, astrological science, but mainly its place is in spirituality, and particularly Buddhism, and that's where it holds a sort of special place. Whereas many other languages, it also has its own uniqueness, but compared to the Tibetan language, it's a little bit different. So there is not to say better or worse, but somehow it has its own places. So therefore now the English language, although it can somehow express, translate the Buddhist ideas and philosophy, nevertheless it will take a lot of doing. Meaning it will take a lot of effort, and that in one word one may not be able to express everything. So therefore you will need several words, verbs and adjectives and so on to explain probably one thing. So therefore if you have a few translations, I think it will be helpful. And now in terms of now probably one of the question is that now what does a Bodhisattva practice? What is their practice? And although it's countless, there are ways of summarizing. And one of the classical ways of summarizing is what is known as the 6 perfections, I think, in English translation, or the 6 paramitas. It is through those 6 ways of living, carrying oneself, and that helps us to understand what is it to be a Bodhisattva. So in these 10 chapters, basically all those 6 paramitas are explained. It is said that the first 3 chapters and also the last chapter, they mainly emphasize on the first paramita of generosity, which is very important. It's one of the very first activities, or one of the very first practices. And so therefore it's described in detail in these 4 chapters, the first 3 and the last one, which is a chapter for dedication. So normally it is said that in terms of being generous, there are, in terms of its activity, one can be, the practice of generosity can be described into somehow 3 folds. First as a way of being generous in offering what is needed, like something. Well, basically providing what is most necessary in terms of living a life, let's say, such as food, shelter, and everything. And then the third category is that of providing refuge. That's it. So it's the being generous in terms of providing refuge, and the last one is the generosity of the truth and the absolute meaning. And in this case, particularly the third chapter is talking about how to practice bodhicitta, how to gain bodhicitta. So therefore, that's the absolute or ultimate form of generosity, absolute giving, because it is through this that we will be able to overcome all forms of poverty. Worldly poverties comes and goes, and they are not really absolute. If conditions are met, they can be overcome. But the real poverty is if our consciousness, if our being, if our understanding, if our mind lacks knowledge, truth, wisdom, these essential qualities that are sometimes interpreted as inner wealth. If those types of wealth are missing, then there is constant poverty, one could say, and it becomes a basis for all forms of other poverty. So therefore, this chapter is talking particularly about that, and the next two chapters, which we don't really need to talk about it here because it will come in next year, talks about ethics. And then the others are defined by its own, the chapter's name itself. So with that understanding, then maybe we can slowly try to brush through the topics. I keep saying brush because it's basically when we practice the Buddha Dharma, or when we try to learn or understand Buddha Dharma, we cannot learn it in the way that we learn in terms of the way we educate ourselves in the modern way, that you take a certain class and you try to learn certain points and write a few terms and then get the stamp and then done, you got the degree and that's it. It doesn't really work like that. It's not mechanical. That's the term I would like to use. When we try to learn Buddhism, we cannot approach it mechanically, although it has its own mechanism. But we cannot approach it in a sort of very mechanical way. If you do that, then we will just get certain forms of it, but we will not really understand the essence. So probably the most beneficial way to go about it is to approach it organically. It's a term that nowadays we use often. It's a way to sell products, and so hopefully, having said that, yes. So hopefully it'll do its job. Now, in short, I think that's more or less how we have to approach it, organically. It's just like growing a tree or gardening, meaning that it takes time. You cannot just gain the result with a push of a button. That you really need to endure, you need to nurture, you need to cultivate, you need to grow with it to a point where, if you are a farmer, like to a point where your hands actually break in a way, your skins break, and that you really sort of become one with it, and only then you'll get somewhere. And that's why in our institutes where it promotes higher education in the forms of Tibetan known as Hyedras and so on. The reason why we see so many studying year after year the same subject, although after a certain year normally they could be considered as certain professors and so on with degrees, but nevertheless they still endure, they still try to learn after years of actually gaining the degree. That's because of this very same fact, very same reason. and because you need to grow with it, because you can understand certain formulas, certain mechanisms, like logics and so on, but that alone will not really satisfy the real hunger, let's say, the sort of the real hunger to really gain something substantial. Yes. So it's like, otherwise it will be like eating popcorn, where it looks large, it certainly fills the mouth, but after a few chew, it's gone. So this is something substantial. It's heavy, and it will nourish for a long time. Actually, it will nourish forever. And yes. Now, in the beginning of the chapter of this, in the beginning of this third chapter, it continues where we left. In the second chapter, where it talks about the preparations that we need, basically, in terms of accumulating merit and wisdom. Normally, I think we should be quite familiar with the practice of 7 branches. It's a term to describe a certain sets of practice, a certain sets of practices that involves making aspirations, purifying the mind, motivating the mind, developing right intentions, so that the mind becomes able. I think last time, a few days ago, when I met some of you, I said that word, able, flexible, and it's a way to somehow make our mind more flexible, so that it's able to understand, it's able to have the means to truly generate bodhicitta. So therefore, normally known as 7 branches. In this, I think it is described into 8 branches, meaning the first branch, where we take refuge, is divided into 2 by taking refuge and offering and so on, or by prostrations and by, what is it? It's by offering, yes, that's it. So now in here, we come to the part where we basically rejoice. I think it's the 4th one, and we rejoice. Rejoicing is a very important aspect of practice. Like with many other practices, by rejoicing, we are able to accumulate immense merit. It's a very skillful means, meaning that it doesn't require anything from us other than to have a pure mind, a pure intention, to a point where we don't even have to lift a finger, one could say. Just by rejoicing in the goodness of others, in short, or rejoicing after yourself also for having done great things, through that alone you are able to accumulate immense merit. Merit is in some ways like it's like a credit, one could say, but not a sort of physical thing, but it earns trust, basically. It earns confidence in oneself, in others. If you live a righteous life, automatically the surroundings will command, that righteous way of living will command respect of your surroundings. So in the same way, basically that's the point. If we rejoice, we're able to earn merit so that we actually command respect. respect from sentient beings, respect from one's fellow practitioners, and of course it also earns blessings from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well. So therefore, in all, it's one of the most important things. And the more I'm using the word righteous, but basically what I'm trying to refer to is living a positive way of life. Yes, a virtuous way of life. Such virtuous actions will automatically make room for more wisdom. So therefore, merit and wisdom goes hand in hand. So therefore, if we rejoice, then we are able to accumulate immense merit. Tataling inji ke solarong pa sebo chujana ta desarating doraba. Temato ta pegedola singing chundo mandula singing singing chudo juk de getun zoyan. Tani number 2 yang tanda chunjung na thingmang ba zigi jire. Adang ranso gi dan nyamle yona manager ba. Wati indu number 2 jire chang message shugo ya mandu. Ina taling indi long de public apsu long snare de cheshe de puluk daw de tanang long chu de pugyu raba. Te yang tanda anjasa shiwala khonrik sowan anjin 혼신 마중 바yan de 준 개발 달아 예메데 de 진든 삼반 달아면 랑기 로 검증에 좀 소나지 enge talenge 최셰데 롱스도 피규 가인선나 단다 강사라고 땡준 된다고 담배춘 된다고 지 오늘 콩도 추구고 연나 디톤용 소바지 랑기 줄라 추구기 연나 네버도 에마나 직 대바템보 수정장마 테니 다가나진 튼진 망보지고 그 예정 다드린샤 튼지기 저단 튼진 매베데 마르데 예나양 튼진 룰트에 가고 인장 튼지기 강서라고 직법의 첨부 강서라고 튼지기 법의 첨부 매베 토네 매베 네츠를 때니 단다 네 롱고츠도랑 비자기요 롱고츠도 비비나 지나데 여샤샤레 가인선나 데네 강서라고 내로그 그때 자상 세보 천den경기 장주 선바 사토비 장주 선바 지가 송 인정 팀들의 편을 제장 롱고츠 등이 단다 백기게 토네야 디 짜바데 마치 가서 쫓어도 저기 tinti mayimba tanda injiki chambu shingi yotsang tiki thone ma shujadu namba tsuyo garo gongdo jire. So now what I will do is I will also read the root text of the chapter in Tibetan and afterwards in English so that we also have the long. As I said right now in Tibetan that I'm actually offering this teaching in the form of a long, not really in terms of teaching. Because to be really able to teach, one needs to know everything. Meaning that one needs to know doesn't mean that you need to know the concept. But you truly need to know. For example, like you need to have some kind of certainty that life is truly impermanent, or the water is truly cold, that fire really burns. To that extent, of course, we can have a theory about, the fire is hot, the water is cold, but it is very different from when you actually experience it. So therefore, I don't presume to know everything, so therefore I'm offering this in a form of lung as an oral transmission, and that itself alone will have immense merit. Liu Sumba, Changjub Jesem Yon Suzuma Temba, Semjin Kunjing and Zongi, Dungal Ngasu Gewatang, Dunga Chenda Dernela, Gawe Jesu Yirango. Changjub Jurjur Gesaba, Tela Jesu Yirango, Lujing Kowe Dungale, Nebar Tala Yirango. Jobanam Ji Changjub Dang, Jase Salang Yirango. Semjin Tamji Dinzebe, Tuji Gewa Janso Dang, Semjin Pembran Zepala, Gawe Jesu Yirango. I'll be reading one of the translations. So it's the third chapter, so full acceptance of the awakening mind. Gladly do I rejoice in the virtue that relieves the misery of all those in unfortunate states, and that gives happiness to the suffering. I rejoice in that gathering of virtue that is the cause for, in brackets, the arhats, awakening. I rejoice in the definite freedom of embodied creatures from the miseries of cyclic existence. I rejoice in the awakening of the Buddhas and also in the spiritual levels of their children. And with gladness, I rejoice in the ocean of virtue for developing an awakening mind that wishes all beings to be happy, as well as in the deeds that bring them benefit. So within these four verses, and then it basically describes a number of ways of rejoicing, or basically rejoicing after various reasons. So in order, the first one focuses on the, in general, rejoicing after all the goodness that all sentient beings generate, or they gather, all the good things that they gather. Meaning in this case, maybe if some of you might remember, from time to time I had said that when I was trying to describe the practice of rejoicing, and that normally in order to inspire ourselves, we try to rejoice. The object of, or the reason for rejoicing would be to think of absolute qualities, such as the qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, because often that really helps, because in terms of its appearance, in terms of its presence, in terms of just the thought itself, it already impresses us. We always need something uplifting, and and only impressive reasons, impressive objects or impressive causes makes us impressed. So therefore, we often begin with the activities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, so that then we find a way to rejoice. But the gradual way, as it is described here, is that we first focus on sentient beings, meaning fellow sentient beings, and it has actually a very profound reason, because first, it is very common to all of us that we need to be able to relate. Even though we are impressed by great beings, often the challenge is that we are not able to relate to them. Let's say that we have a hero in our mind, or a heroine in our mind, that we idolize, that we want to become, and so on. But somehow, the reason why we are not able to really somehow bring full inspiration is because we don't really find many relating factors, and so therefore sometimes that's a hindrance. And so that's why in here this gradual way of rejoicing sort of takes care of that problem. So first of all, rejoice after sentient beings' goodness, because we ourselves would not really consider as perfect, or the complete opposite, meaning completely imperfect. We will consider ourselves right in the middle, and that's where we're happy. And so in this case, all sentient beings will be more or less in that state, let's say, currently. So therefore we will be able to relate. We will be able to relate the little details, the little goodness that every now and then all sentient beings generate. So therefore we rejoice in them, although they may not be profound, they may not be deep, they may not be vast, but at least they are good. Yes. For example, someone is helping someone who's in need of shelter, or some who are in need of food or drink. So accordingly, we see a number of, actually a great many of sentient beings just within our own world, where whenever there's a disaster, whenever there is a problem, that people actually come together and do many great things to support. Although that compared to an activity of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, of course there is a difference, to a point where I would consider sky and earth. But nevertheless, in terms of being good, that nature it's already virtuous, it's already good, it's already decent. So therefore, there's enough or many reasons why we can rejoice after them. So therefore, we rejoice in the actions that relieves, in this case one could say, to be more precise, that relieves temporary confusions, temporary pain, temporary sufferings. Meaning that if one provides food and drinks, it will relieve of the temporary hunger, yes, for today. But tomorrow is a different case. Whereas a dharma, although it may not be edible, it may not be drinkable, but nevertheless, for the long run, it is able to solve the actual root of hunger, the actual root of thirst. So therefore they are more profound. But nevertheless, as it says here, so we rejoice in everything that gives happiness to the suffering. Then we also rejoice in, now in this case it is considered that the first one is that of fellow sentient beings, and the next is in a category where it says it's in that of beyond worldly activities, beyond worldly qualities. It is in that we rejoice. So now from here onwards, then we speak of the activities of the arhats, the activities of the bodhisattvas, and finally the Buddha. So first, where we think of, we have to somehow take time to really understand what defines an arhat. And it's something that, that cannot be just said in a few words. It's something that we have to study. It's something that we have to learn. That it's coming, in short, one could say that it's coming from a basic, the cause for their being, let's say, to become enlightened in the arhat's way. It is coming from an emotion. It is coming from a situation where one understands actually a great truth, unlike any other, that their activity, their quality really commands our respect, commands our practice of rejoicing, because they understand something very, very profound. meaning that they understand the Four Noble Truths to a great extent, actually. We, as I said yesterday, we only understand its concepts. Just to concept even itself, it takes a long time, and we often get it wrong. And then we are sort of stuck there for a long time, and then again another tour guide has to come and say, no, it's that direction, you know. And then sometimes we may be lucky that we may find several tour guides, but each tour guide has their own experience, has their own tradition and way of showing the way, and then we are lost in terms of which advice to take and so on. So there are so many forms of challenges, you know. So, but in the case of those beings who seeks for arhathood, they have come a long way. Actually, so long that we cannot imagine. It takes eons and eons, actually, to reach that level of understanding, that level of knowledge, that level of wisdom. So it is coming from understanding what is the real root of suffering, what are we actually trying to renounce, what are we trying to run away from, and we, compared to ourselves, we really don't know from what we have to run away from, and what to renounce. Whereas in their case, they really know out of extensive experience, and so therefore they seek a path where they find the means to seize, one could say. I'm not sure if that's the right English word, but to basically to eradicate the root of those confusions, the confusions of fear. And as a result, what happens is that they reach a state where they cessate, is it? I don't know. Where they basically eradicate the root completely, so that there is no more rebirth, one could say. Because they see that rebirth is a cause of, it's a very tiring job. It's endless. And each time you take a new rebirth, you have to acquire all the means from the start. And so therefore it's a tiring thing. No matter how much of a wisdom and experience you have gained in this life, if you are lucky enough, some of it may come through the transit. You really pack your luggage really well, of course, you know. And then through the transit, often it's the case where you might lose your luggage. So it is a similar case for most of us. So therefore, they see that there is that you cannot really rely on the system. There is no refund, literally and metaphorically. So therefore, they try to basically go to the source, meaning basically to find the manager. So only when you find the manager, then I'm losing my train of thoughts now. I don't know if I'm talking about Dharma or a particular experience, you know. In short, they see that the actual manager is none other than the karma in klesha. So those are the two different areas of the manager, alias names. So they basically eradicate any causes, conditions that might give, that might, I don't know if it's the right word, that might induce rebirth, basically. And by cutting that root, eradicating that root, then there is a state, one could say. Probably that's a very good translation, the state, where it is known as Arhatut, or a state of beyond suffering. In Tibetan known as Nyangde or Nyangalendeba, meaning sort of beyond suffering or past suffering. So basically it's a state where there is no more rebirth, basically. So now in this, one could say particularly the author himself, the Shantideva, as well as he's indirectly asking us also to rejoice in their endeavor, in their journey, in their accomplishment, because it's not a simple thing. It's not something to say that just because we practice Mahayana or Vajrayana that somehow to feel a sense of pride and to think that, oh, that's a lesser vehicle and so on. But if you really sort of understand where they're coming from and what kind of, basically where they're coming from, that it really, truly respects our command. So therefore we rejoice in all of those who are searching for this path, who are on the path, and who have already reached the destination. So we rejoice after them. That's why it says, from the miseries of cyclic existence. And the next is that of the Buddhas, as well as in here it says, and also in the spiritual levels of their children. So probably it's an interesting translation, but nevertheless, it refers to bodhisattvas. Sometimes the translation states sort of to be, they put it in they state it in a more majestic way by saying bodhisattvas, Buddha's prince or heart prince or heart son. Heart meaning that the essence of the Buddhas is none other than bodhicitta, and bodhisattvas are born out of practicing bodhicitta, cultivating bodhicitta, so therefore they are known as heart sons. So in this case, in a very practical sense, as their children. So basically in their activities. And so since we are now trying to practice the ways of the bodhisattvas, the most important aspect is to really try to learn, comprehend, understand where they're coming from. So the truth that they have found, the truth that they have understood is basically the same, almost identical to that of the Arhats, let's say. Meaning that it's the same truth, but the only difference is that somehow those who becomes bodhisattvas, or the bodhisattvas somehow use the same logic on others, let's say, in a way, in order to relate to others, in order to benefit others.